I opened my eyes, and the world around me wasn't mine. The air was thick, damp and heavy, filled with the sound of distant roars that shook the ground. Towering ferns and massive trees stretched toward the sky, their leaves glistening with ancient dew. I should have been terrified, but what froze my blood wasn't the jungle. It was what stood in the middle of it. A building. White walls, sharp lines, windows reflecting a light that didn't belong to this age. A laboratory. That was the moment my life split into before and after. I had fallen into a time that shouldn't exist, and I had seen something no human was ever meant to see. Subscribe now, because I'm about to tell you the truth they never wanted revealed. Tell me, would you believe me if I said I saw dinosaurs being born in a laboratory millions of years ago? The first thing I felt was the ground trembling beneath me. Not the kind of vibration from a passing truck or a distant train. This was deeper, older, like the earth itself had a heartbeat. I pushed myself up from the damp soil, my palms sinking into moss so thick it felt like a sponge. When I lifted my hand, it was covered in tiny crawling insects, each one larger than any I had ever seen in my life. I stood, disoriented, and spun around. Everywhere I looked, the forest towered over me. Trees as wide as houses stretched so high that their canopies disappeared into a haze of mist. The air was alive with buzzing and screeching. Dragonflies the size of my arm darted past, their wings slicing the air with a metallic hum. Somewhere in the distance, a low, guttural roar shook the leaves, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Footsteps that belonged to something far larger than me. I pressed my back against the trunk of a colossal tree, my heart hammering in my chest. I should have been in my own world, in my own time. But everything around me told me otherwise. I had gone back, far back, to a world no human should walk in. And yet, among the prehistoric chaos, something didn't fit. Through the mist, half hidden by vines and massive ferns, I saw it. Straight lines, flat surfaces, and sharp corners. A shape too artificial for this ancient world. I stumbled forward, pushing through the brush, and there it was, a building. Its walls gleamed white against the jungle, smooth and seamless like polished stone. The structure was modern, impossibly modern, with tinted glass windows that reflected the green of the forest. I froze. It shouldn't exist here, not in a world millions of years before humanity. I crept closer, unable to stop myself. The nearer I got, the louder the hum became. Not the roar of dinosaurs or the buzz of insects, but the low, mechanical drone of electricity. I pressed my ear to the cold surface of the wall. Beneath the hum, I could swear I heard another sound. Beeping. Machines. Computers. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just an anomaly. It was an intrusion. Someone or something had placed this laboratory here, hidden in the folds of time. I circled the building, searching for an entrance. The ground trembled again, this time closer, accompanied by the rhythmic pounding of heavy footsteps. Leaves shook above me as something enormous moved through the forest. I crouched low, my eyes darting between the jungle and the sterile white wall of the structure. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my curiosity anchored me in place. And then, through a break in the foliage, I saw the impossible. A shadow passed between the trees, tall as a 2-story house. Its outline was unmistakable. Long tail, muscular legs, and a head crowned with ridges. A dinosaur. My throat went dry. It tilted its massive head, sniffing the air, then let out a roar that rattled my bones. Birds exploded from the canopy in panic. I pressed myself flat against the wall, praying it wouldn't see me. The creature eventually moved on, disappearing into the dense forest. But even after it was gone, the echo of its roar lingered in my chest. I turned back to the building. My hand shook as I reached for a panel near what looked like a sealed door. When my fingers brushed it, the panel lit up, bright red lights glowing against the prehistoric darkness. The door slid open with a hiss. Cold air rushed out, carrying the sterile scent of chemicals and disinfectant. My heart pounded in my ears, and that's when I knew. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't an accident. This place wasn't abandoned, it was active. I hesitated at the threshold, the ancient jungle at my back, the sterile light ahead. Then I whispered to myself, as much a warning as a promise. And then I saw something that changed everything. The door slid open wider, and a wave of cold, sterile air poured out, chilling my skin. I stepped across the threshold, every nerve screaming at me to turn back. The door closed behind me with a heavy hiss, sealing out the jungle in its ancient chaos. For a moment, I just stood there, paralyzed. The hallway stretched before me, narrow and clinical, its walls smooth and white. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, humming in a rhythm almost identical to the one I had heard outside through the wall. My footsteps echoed against the tile floor. Too clean, too perfect for a world that should have been nothing but dirt and stone. It felt like walking into the future, except the forest outside reminded me I had gone impossibly far into the past. I moved cautiously down the hallway, passing door after door. Some had windows, dark, tinted glass that allowed no glimpse of what was inside. Others were sealed completely, glowing with strange red symbols on panels beside them. I reached out and touched one of the panels, but the glass remained opaque, unyielding. The deeper I went, the louder the sounds became. The steady hum of machines was joined by the faint clatter of keyboards, the beep of monitors, and the soft murmur of voices. I froze at the corner of the hall and peered around. There they were. At least 6 figures in white lab coats stood clustered around a long table. Their heads were bowed, their hands moving quickly over consoles and glowing screens. I expected to see faces illuminated by the light, but there was something off. Their features were blurred, indistinct, as though reality itself refused to let me look directly at them. I squinted, blinked, rubbed my eyes. Nothing changed. The faces were still wrong, like unfinished sketches. They moved like people, spoke in low tones like people, but every instinct inside me told me they weren't. I pressed my back against the wall, my breath caught in my throat. They hadn't noticed me. Not yet. I forced myself to move, one careful step at a time, creeping past the doorway. My hand brushed a glass panel, and for a brief moment the surface flickered, revealing a glimpse inside another room. My heart nearly stopped. Rows of cylindrical tanks lined the walls, each one filled with a viscous green liquid. Floating inside were shapes, small but growing. At first they looked like lizards, their spines curled, tails twitching faintly. But as I looked closer, I realized their proportions were wrong. Their legs were thick, their claws sharp even at such a tiny stage. Their jaws were lined with teeth, already glinting in the sterile light. Embryos. Dinosaur embryos. One of them twitched violently, its limbs jerking as though responding to something unseen. The liquid bubbled, and its lid released a faint hiss of gas. I stumbled back from the glass, my stomach twisting. I should have run right then. I should have turned and forced the door open again, back into the jungle. But I didn't. Curiosity, and something else, maybe even destiny, rooted me in place. I pressed deeper into the lab. At the end of the hallway, I found another door, half ajar. I slipped inside, praying the faceless scientists wouldn't notice me. The room beyond was larger, lined with more tanks. But these were different. They weren't filled with liquid. Instead, they were incubators, glowing softly with a pale blue light. Inside each one lay an egg, larger than my head, its shell veined with faint lines of light. Some of them pulsed faintly, as though beating in time with a hidden heart. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the glass. The shell beneath the glow shifted. Something inside moved. I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. They weren't just embryos, they were hatching. And that's when I heard it. Footsteps behind me. I spun around. One of the lab-coated figures stood in the doorway, its head tilted unnaturally, like a puppet with strings pulled too tight. I braced myself, ready for it to call out, to sound an alarm. Instead, it whispered, "You shouldn't be here." My blood ran cold. The words clung to me like frost. "You shouldn't be here." The figure's voice was quiet, but it reverberated in my skull, carrying more weight than a whisper ever should. For a moment, I couldn't move. The blurred features, the unnatural tilt of its head. It was like staring at a human shape painted in watercolor, always shifting, never solid. But then, without another sound, the figure turned and walked away, its white coat swaying. It hadn't raised an alarm, it hadn't attacked. It simply left. My breath returned in ragged gasps. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to calm the panic that clawed at me. I knew I should leave. Every instinct screamed at me to run back to the jungle, to escape while I still could. But the glowing incubators, the twitching embryos, they held me captive in a different way. I had to know what was happening here. I crept deeper into the lab. The next door slid open with a hiss, revealing a larger chamber. My eyes widened, my mind reeling as I took it in. It was a hatchery. Rows of reinforced enclosures stretched across the room, separated by thick glass walls. Inside each one, movement stirred. At first it was subtle, a ripple through the shadows, the scrape of claw against stone. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw them clearly. Dinosaurs. Small ones, no taller than my knee. Their bodies sleek and muscular, tails swishing as they darted about. Their scales shimmered under the harsh lights, some tinted green, others with stripes of black and orange. Their eyes glowed faintly, intelligent and calculating. Velociraptors. I froze, my entire body locked in terror and awe. These weren't the skeletons I had seen in museums, or the CGI monsters from movies. They were alive, breathing, moving, watching each other with sharp, predatory focus. One of them snapped at another, its teeth clashing with a sound that echoed through the glass. The other hissed, swiping with claws that carved shallow gouges into the floor. My stomach twisted. These creatures weren't just alive, they were enhanced, faster, stronger, smarter. And then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of the raptors stopped pacing and turned toward me. Its eyes locked on mine, unblinking. The glass separated us, yet I felt its gaze pierce through, as if it recognized me. Slowly, it approached the barrier, pressing its snout against the glass. Condensation bloomed where it breathed, its sharp teeth glinting inches from my face. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the floor. The raptor hissed, the sound low and guttural, vibrating in my chest. Then, as though summoned by the noise, the others turned too. One by one, they gathered at the glass, their glowing eyes fixed on me. My breathing quickened. I could feel sweat dripping down my neck. And that's when I saw something even stranger. On the walls of their enclosure, scratched into the reinforced stone, were markings. Symbols. Not random claw marks, but deliberate shapes. Triangles. Circles. Patterns that repeated over and over. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering. The faceless children in the other story I once told had drawn the same kinds of symbols. Now they were here, etched by claws millions of years too old to understand them. I whispered to myself, my voice shaking, and then I saw something that changed everything. The sound of heavy machinery snapped my attention away. At the far end of the chamber, a massive door slid open, flooding the room with cold white light. A different enclosure came into view, larger, darker. Inside it, something moved. At first, I thought it was just another dinosaur. But as the figure shifted into the light, I realized it wasn't. It was bigger, bulkier, its form twisted by something unnatural. Its body resembled a tyrannosaurus, but its proportions were wrong. Longer limbs, ridged spines glowing faintly along its back, and eyes that burned with unnatural light. The creature let out a roar so deep it shook the glass walls, rattling the entire chamber. The raptors froze for a heartbeat, then scattered in terror, retreating into the shadows of their pen. I staggered back, my ears ringing, my chest vibrating with the force of the sound. This wasn't just a laboratory, it was a factory for building monsters. I pressed my back to the door, desperate to get away from the sight of it. But even as I slipped out of the chamber, my mind reeled with a single question. Who or what was creating them? The roar still echoed in my bones as I slipped out of the hatchery. I pressed my back to the wall, trying to catch my breath. The fluorescent lights above flickered once, twice, then steadied. My ears rang, and my heart pounded in uneven rhythms. I knew I shouldn't go further. I knew I should turn back, push open the outer door, and run into the jungle. But something stronger than fear kept me moving. Curiosity, yes, but also the certainty that I was standing on the edge of a truth far bigger than myself. The hallways narrowed as I moved deeper. The sterile white walls gave way to darker, older stone, as if the lab had been carved directly into the mountain beneath the forest. The air grew colder, metallic, carrying a tang that reminded me of blood and rust. Warning signs lined the walls, bold red triangles with symbols I didn't recognize. The panels here were different too, glowing faintly with shifting geometric patterns instead of numbers or words. I reached the end of the hallway and found a door unlike the others. Taller, heavier. Its surface was black, not white, and etched with deep grooves that shimmered faintly in the light. It looked less like a door and more like a seal. For a long moment, I just stood there, hand hovering inches from the panel beside it. Every nerve in my body screamed not to touch it. But my hand moved anyway, almost as if compelled. The panel glowed. The seal split down the middle with a hiss. The doors groaned open. The chamber beyond was vast, stretching so far that the ceiling disappeared into shadow. Rows of massive enclosures filled the space, each one reinforced with steel beams and glowing energy fields. The air was thick with sound, low growls, heavy breathing, the scrape of claws against stone. I stepped inside, and my stomach twisted. The creatures here weren't like the ones I had seen before. These weren't replicas of dinosaurs. They were something else. One enclosure held a triceratops, but its horns glowed faintly, etched with pulsating lines of light, as if metal had fused with bone. Another pen contained a creature that looked like a raptor, but its limbs were too long, its eyes too human. And in the largest enclosure, half hidden in the dark, something massive shifted, its body rippling with unnatural muscle. I staggered forward, unable to look away. That was when I noticed the walls. They weren't plain stone. They were lined with transparent capsules, much like the embryonic tanks I had seen earlier, but these were larger. Inside floated human shapes, men, women, even children, their bodies suspended in thick liquid, their chests rising and falling in perfect unison. I clutched my mouth to stifle a scream. They weren't just making dinosaurs here. They were merging them with us. I stumbled back, my legs shaking. My shoulder slammed against the glass of one of the capsules. The figure inside was a young boy, maybe 10 years old, his eyes closed, his face pale. But as the impact rattled the glass, his eyes snapped open. They glowed. For a second I couldn't move. His gaze locked onto mine, and his lips formed a single word. Silent, but clear. Run. The hum of machines rose sharply, vibrating through the chamber. Lights flickered. Alarms beeped. The massive creature in the shadows shifted, its ridged back scraping against steel supports. The air filled with a sound like thunder as its claws struck the ground. And then I heard footsteps. I spun toward the door. Figures in white lab coats filled the entrance, their faces still blurred, their bodies moving in eerie synchronization. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to freeze me where I stood. I backed away, my heel catching on the grated floor. The boy in the capsule pounded his hand weakly against the glass, his glowing eyes wide with terror. The hum became a roar, shaking dust loose from the ceiling. I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. You'd never believe me if I told you what I saw down here. The figures advanced, the enclosures rattled, and from the shadows, the massive beast began to move toward the light. The roar rolled through the chamber like thunder, rattling the steel beams and vibrating in my chest. I stumbled backward, eyes darting between the blurred-faced scientists and the massive shadow shifting in the largest enclosure. My pulse hammered. Every part of me screamed to escape, but the door was blocked, and the truth was unfolding whether I wanted it or not. The figures in white coats didn't rush me. They didn't even acknowledge me at first. Instead, they moved in eerie synchronization, their hands pressing against glowing panels mounted to the walls. Lights flickered on, illuminating the enclosures one by one. What I saw made my stomach twist. Each pen held something different. Not natural dinosaurs, but creatures altered, refined, sharpened like weapons. A stegosaurus with metallic plates fused to its back, pulsing faintly as though alive with electricity. A raptor with forelimbs too long, its hands almost human, claws twitching in anticipation. In another cell, a pterosaur unfolded wings tipped with glowing veins of light, casting ghostly shadows across the walls. These weren't accidents of evolution. They were deliberate. I shook my head violently. Why? Why are you doing this? My voice cracked, but no one answered. And then, one figure broke from the group. It stepped closer, its face flickering like static. My breath caught as it leaned in, and for the first time, I heard words clearly formed. This place was never about preservation. It was never about science. It was about creation. I staggered back. Creation of what? The figure's blurred features seemed to stretch, almost as if trying to smile. Weapons, soldiers, a new order built from the bones of the past. I glanced again at the boy in the capsule. His glowing eyes stared at me, pleading. My mind reeled. Not just dinosaurs, not just hybrids, humans too. The figure tilted its head. You don't understand, do you? This laboratory isn't in your past. It isn't even in your time. It's a fracture, a place between. We plant our work here so it echoes through history. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Who are you? Its voice dropped to a whisper that slithered into my mind. Not who. What? We are the architects. And you? It raised a hand and pointed at me. You were chosen. The hum in the chamber deepened, pressing into my skull. My skin prickled. My vision blurred. Not from fear, but from something else. Something inside me. I glanced at my hand and nearly screamed. The veins beneath my skin glowed faintly. White light pulsed with each heartbeat. No, this isn't happening. My voice broke. The boy in the capsule slammed his small fists against the glass, his glowing mouth forming words I couldn't hear. The massive shadow in the largest enclosure shifted again, its ridged spine scraping steel. The scientists moved closer, forming a half circle around me, their faces flickering like broken screens. I clutched my chest. My heart was beating erratically, not in its natural rhythm but in sync with the hum. My breath quickened. The edges of my vision shimmered. I felt stronger, sharper. My senses exploded with clarity. Every sound, every vibration in the chamber carved itself into my mind. And yet, with that clarity came terror, because I understood what they were doing. They weren't just breeding monsters. They were making conduits, vessels, experiments that blurred the line between human and beast, and I was becoming one of them. I staggered back, shaking my head violently, as if denial could stop the change. "Why me?" I screamed. The blurred figure stepped closer, whispering, "Because you survived the crossing. Most don't. That makes you valuable. That makes you ours." The glow beneath my skin brightened, crawling up my arm like fire spreading through veins. My reflection in the capsule glass warped. I saw my own face, but twisted, flickering with light, my eyes glowing faintly just like the boys. Panic surged. I slammed my fists against the glass beside me. "No! I'm not one of you!" The boy inside mirrored me, pressing his glowing hands against the same spot, his mouth moving in unison with mine. For a split second, it was as though the barrier didn't exist, as though we were the same being. The chamber roared with sound machines, alarms, the beast in the shadows bellowing, the scientists chanting in a low, unearthly hum. I stumbled away, clutching my burning arm, my mind spinning. I didn't know if I was still me, but one thought carved itself into my brain, burning hotter than fear. And then I realized they hadn't brought me here by accident. I was part of the experiment all along. The alarms were a sound I felt before I heard them, a pressure that tightened the air, a metallic vibration under my feet. Lights flashed red in angry staccato. The machines that had hummed with a cold, clinical patience all day surged into panic. Somewhere in the bowels of the lab, heavy doors clanged and locks engaged with hydraulic protest. The massive beast in the dark let out a roar that split the chamber clean in two. Glass trembled along every row of enclosures. The raptors that had been circling, watching me with unnerving intelligence, erupted into motion like coiled springs released. They moved with lethal grace, claws scraping, tails balancing, lungs smoking the chilled air in puffs. I didn't think. I ran. Footsteps pounded behind me. Not the measured, synchronized shuffle of the lab technicians, but the thundering, uneven stomps of something that wanted me dead. A raptor vaulted from behind a barrier, nails skittering across tile. I ducked, stumbled, and slammed shoulder first into a maintenance corridor. The fluorescent strips above flickered and sizzled, throwing my shadow long and frantic across the polished walls. Would you believe me if I said they trained the animals to hunt like soldiers? I heard myself whisper. A question to the dark, an attempt at humor that bounced off nothing and died. It didn't matter whether a listener believed me. I believed it. I could feel the training inside their movements, the deliberate economy of their speed. This was war, dressed as science. A panel spat, sparks at my knee. I yanked at a welded hatch, and it obeyed with a hiss. Damp, cool air rushed in, a service tunnel that sloped downward toward the earth. I dropped into it, crawling, hands scraping on concrete, the smell of oil and bone thick in my nose. Behind me, an angry chorus. Claws. The roar now mingled with alarms. A human voice screaming once and then cut off. The corridor forked. Left led toward ventilation shafts that probably fed the incubation rooms. Right led to the surface, to the jungle where I had stumbled in. I chose right, because madness favors hope over reason. Up the ladder, into the maintenance hatch, through another squealing door. My lungs burned. The changes in me were subtle at first. A new keenness at the edges of sight. Sounds rising crisp, where before they had blurred. A strange coolness behind my eyes like night vision turning on. My hand, the one I'd slapped against the glass weeks ago, trembled, and for the first time I noticed veins of pale light under skin, pulsing in the same rhythm as my heartbeat. I scrambled through a service entrance and burst into green. The jungle, raw and overwhelming, leaves whipping my face, insects the size of fists beating at my shoulders. Sunlight punched through the canopy like a promise. For a moment I felt human again. Then the ground shuddered, and the promise cracked. Footfalls thundered through the undergrowth, a T-Rex-sized shape cutting a path through ferns like a scythe. Closer, faster, and behind it a pack of raptors came like knives through fog. My feet pumped. Branches slapped my face. I heard the lab's alarms shrink behind me to a distant shriek, then swell again as the creatures pushed after the exit. I darted along a narrow animal trail, heart a fist in my throat, lungs burning. My senses recorded everything. The damp smell of decomposing leaves, a high insect chitter, the feathered brush of something moving on my right. My vision picked out a glint of metal, a broken ladder, the skeleton of what had been an observation platform. I used it, hauling myself upward, breath tearing, and for a second, the world tilted in a blur of green and steel. Below me, a raptor leapt, its body elegant and wrong, and clipped the platform. I kicked, swung, and fell into a tangle of vines. Pain lanced my shoulder, but I rolled and kept moving. The jungle became a torrent of sound and motion. Heart pounding. Something in me surged. A predator's clarity, cold and bright. And I threaded through trees with an animal's cunning, sensing paths and gaps as if they were carved for me. I stumbled onto a ridge and froze. Below, through a break in the trees, I saw the lab like a wound in the earth. Scorched grass, shattered panels, smoke curling from vents. The massive doors I'd thrust through were closed now, sealing off the mountain like a tomb. Machines still screamed. I dropped to my knees and pressed my palm to the soil. The mark on my arm thrummed faintly, like a small engine under the skin. The veins of light that had first appeared in the lab pulsed brighter when I clamped my hand over them. My breath came shallow. I felt changes ripple through muscle and mind. Faster reflexes, a distant sense for movement, an ache for raw, hot meat that I didn't recognize as mine. A shadow crossed the sky then, too big for any bird. The jungle fell silent for a heartbeat. Above the tree line, something enormous moved. A silhouette, a long tail, a back crowned with ridged plates. The sound of its passing rattled the leaves. My chest tightened. I had escaped the concrete teeth of the lab, but whatever they had let loose did not belong to a time that could be contained. And I did not belong entirely to myself anymore. Somewhere deeper in me, a voice, not human, whispered a simple certainty. They brought you for a reason. You are part of the design. I lay panting, the jungle pressing close, the distant roars rolling across the canopy. The lab might be sealed, the mountain might smolder, but the mark on my skin glowed steady as a beacon. And as the shadow passed and the world exhaled, I found my hands clenching around a truth that did not comfort. Running might only be the first stage of what they had planned. And then I saw something that changed everything. I don't remember how long I lay there on the ridge. Minutes? Hours? The jungle didn't care. It breathed around me, vast and indifferent, a living ocean of green. But inside me something else was alive, something that had followed me out of the lab. The glow beneath my skin hadn't faded. It pulsed steadily, veins of pale light tracing patterns across my arm, like lightning frozen under the flesh. I tried to cover it with dirt, to rub it away, but the glow seeped through, persistent and calm, like it belonged to me now. I stumbled to my feet. The air was damp and thick, humming with insects. The ground trembled occasionally with the weight of creatures I dared not see. Every sound made me flinch, the snap of a branch, the distant roar of something massive. But worse than the jungle was the silence inside my own head, because for the first time I wasn't sure if my thoughts were mine. I walked, unsteady, until I found a clearing. Sunlight spilled through the canopy, painting everything in gold. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. I held my glowing hand up to the light, half hoping the sun would drown it out. It didn't. The mark burned brighter, and as it did, images flickered in my mind, memories that weren't mine, rows of incubators, blurred faces whispering equations, raptors snapping obediently at unseen commands, human voices chanting in unison, the hum vibrating deeper and deeper until it merged with my pulse. I gasped, clutching my head. It wasn't just a mark. It was a key, a link. I staggered back, my heel catching on a root, and I fell hard onto the dirt. For a moment, the world spun, and then I saw it. Etched into the soil where my hand had struck was the same symbol I had seen carved into the lab walls. A triangle encircling a perfect sphere, glowing faintly before fading back into the earth. My mark had burned it into the ground without my permission. Panic surged. I scrambled to my feet, clutching my arm. No, this isn't me! This isn't mine! My voice cracked, too loud in the silence. The jungle answered. From somewhere far off, a roar rose, not like the others I had heard, not animal. This one was sharper, layered, almost mechanical. It carried a rhythm that felt deliberate, intelligent. The trees trembled, birds scattered in waves, and I knew without seeing, they were coming. Not the dinosaurs, not the scientists, the ones behind it all. My breathing quickened, my body trembling as the glow spread up my arm to my shoulder. I felt faster, stronger, more aware. My eyes cut through the dim light with ease. But with the strength came dread, because I knew I was becoming less human with each passing moment. I ran, through the jungle, across streams, past towering ferns. My footsteps were faster than before, my lungs expanding with an efficiency that wasn't mine. I leapt over roots that should have tripped me, dodged branches before they touched my skin. The changes weren't subtle anymore. They were survival. But the further I ran, the clearer it became. I wasn't running away. I was running towards something. My body, my instincts. They already knew the path. The mark guided me, pulling like a magnet. I burst into another clearing, my chest heaving. Before me rose the mountains, the same ones I had seen when I first arrived. But they were different now. Their walls weren't smooth stone. They were alive with glowing patterns, pulsing faintly in time with the mark on my arm. The laboratory was gone. In its place, the mountains themselves had awakened. I staggered backward, my mind reeling. The roar echoed again, closer now, rattling my bones. The mark on my arm burned so brightly it felt like fire, searing me from the inside out. And then I understood. The lab wasn't the beginning. It was only a fragment, a doorway. The true experiment was me. I sank to my knees, staring at my glowing hand, tears stinging my eyes. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, steady and patient. You survived. You belong to us now. I wanted to scream, to tear the skin from my arm, to reject it. But I couldn't. Because part of me, the part already rewritten, didn't want to. The jungle grew silent. The roar stopped. The hum returned, soft and steady, vibrating through the ground, the air, my bones. I looked at the mountains one last time, their glowing veins crawling like fire across the stone. From that moment on, I knew two things with absolute certainty. First, this was not the end, and second, one day, they would come for me again. And when they do, what happens next will be a story for another time.